Welcome back. We are about to get into yet an amazing conversation. I feel like this morning, this Saturday, this show is dedicated to just information as well as inspiration. Now, my next guest, he goes by the name Dr. Richard Munanga. He's a Regional Climate Change Coordinator, Initiative Climate Action and Development for UNEP. The reason why he's such an important guest and quite inspiring is because he's written a book. It's called Making Africa Work Through the Power of Innovative Volunteerism. I've got in my own personal copy. It is a book that I promise you, within an afternoon, you can actually sit down and finish it. So he's written a book that is out there to make sure, a novel that tells young people, is what he says, to get information to build their own skills, create wealth, and solve some of Africa's problems. In fact, this is what he says: Dear Zinzi, for your passion for Africa and for your belief in Africa's solutions. This is amazing, Dr. This is fantastic, Dr. Richard.
You're welcome.
So what inspired you? You say that it's a matter of telling young people their stories that will help them create their own skills, that within those skills they can create their own wealth, and from that wealth they can have solutions for the African continent, be it on food and climate and so forth. Take me deeper with why you decided to write this book.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Zinzi. If you look across the entire African continent today, the focus has been on material resources rather than on people. And because it's been on material resources, whether it is oil, whether it is the minerals, that has been a misconception. And the motivation behind writing this book, with title Making Africa Work Through the Power of Innovative Volunteerism, was actually to put people at the center of Africa's development. Because if you ignore people and only focus on material, you'll be missing the bigger point, because the skills, the talents, especially of the young people, who today constitute 60% of the entire African population. So we're talking roughly about 720 million energetic, vibrant, talented young people who, if we can tap into their skills, their talents, we will be driving Africa's transformation and also leveraging on the biggest constituents, which is this youth. So that was actually the motivation behind writing this book, because the challenges of the continent today are known, whether it is poverty, whether it is food insecurity, with mothers burying their kids before they even reach the age of 5 because of lack of nutritious food, whether it is energy poverty, with over 620 million people in the entire continent going without energy, without access to electricity. So all these challenges put together cannot be solved without actually engaging each and everyone, regardless of where you come from.
Do you believe that Africa's problems lie within, or that Africa's solutions to her problems lie within Africans? It's our own responsibility to solve our own problems.
Absolutely. Only Africans can be able to drive transformational change, but in partnerships with other partners across the entire globe. But what needs to happen is that if you look, as has been captured in that book, everyone is needed. It takes a village to raise a child, as you'll see in the book. That means that the problems of the entire continent today will need each and every one of us to be able to do so. Whether you are an entrepreneur, you are an educationist or a researcher, or a politician, or a journalist like yourself, it doesn't really matter the profession. What matters is that if we can be able to connect the dots to bring one another, because a challenge of one person presents an opportunity to another person. And so we need each and everyone on board to be able to utilize on what they have, their skills, to be able to solve these challenges. So African challenges are disguised opportunities that can actually be solved by Africans themselves in partnerships with others.
You know, there's this saying, especially now that you've brought about entrepreneurship into the conversation, that where there are problems, there's money to be made. There are hundreds and tons of solutions to be made. Is that the same case we can say for Africa, that despite our problems, in those problems are opportunities for economic prosperity, even for the younger generation?
Absolutely. And I will start off by saying this. It is not fair to discuss things that are abnormal, because normal can never become abnormal. If you take the continent today, to put in perspective your question, we have 240 million citizens going to bed hungry. in a continent that have 65% of uncultivated arable land. And at the same time, we have a continent with 60% of the youth constituting the population, but also 60% of that youthful population is unemployed.
A young workforce.
Absolutely. And we have an agro value chain that if it is expanded, it is worth $1 trillion in less than 11 years from today. At the same time, if we are to expand the entire agro value chain, we can create 17 million jobs each and every year to absorb the already 12 million youth who are getting into the labor market each and every year and competing for less than 3 million jobs. So if you can create 17 million jobs just by expanding the entire agro value chain, you have excess jobs because you have 12 million youth that will be able to be absorbed, and you still have extra 5 million jobs that will even need people to come from elsewhere to take those up. But at the moment, if you take Kenya, for example, 1 in every 6 Kenyan is unemployed. And more so at the same time, if you look at post-harvest losses in Kenya only alone, they're costing the country $500 million each and every year. And the entire continent, that value goes up to $48 billion. But what Africa is doing is importing unemployment and exporting employment. Africa is importing food worth $35 billion each and every year. That's importing unemployment and exporting employment.
So, Dr. Richard, here we are. We have a young, growing workforce on the continent. We have land, now that you're giving an example of agriculture, we have land that is uncultivated. We have one of the best weather climate regions in the world. Then where is the disconnect? Where is the disconnect? What is the problem with Africa? Is it her leadership? Because here we are, we have a continent that is fruitful, a young growing population, a young workforce. Like you said, 60% of Africa's population is a youth demography, about 35 and below. But why are we seeing no constant or permanent solutions, is the question.
The answer is very simple. The continent needs to recognize that the solutions to her problems lies with the people. That the solutions to food insecurity doesn't lie in the Ministry of Agriculture alone. It will need value to be added to what is produced, which means that you need to bring in energy. But that needs to be done by people. And if you just pause a little bit, the youthful population in the continent today, they are quite very, very entrepreneurial.
They are.
They are tech savvy. And if you take Kenya, for example, with the innovations that Kenya have actually pioneered, if you take M-Pesa, Kenya is the first country on earth to be able to come up with that innovative solution, which today is even actually pioneering what is called fintech, that you're combining information communication technology with financial services. And this is an innovation. That means that Africa doesn't lack innovations. It also means that Africa doesn't lack ideas. What I call the 5 I's. So ideas, innovations, Africa have got. But the 3 remaining I's is what Africa is lacking, which has actually been the Achilles of the continent. That is incentives. Africa lacks incentives. Incentives doesn't necessarily mean money, but incentives also mean inspiration. How do you inspire someone? How do you get someone to be passionate about something so that he or she can find a purpose to do something, because money cannot buy passion. I'm not talking about passion juice that is sold in supermarkets. I'm talking about passion, that thing inside each and every one of us that burns, that you can be able to do something, not just because you have to make money out of it, but because you know that it will solve a bigger problem, and in the course of doing in your pocket. Africa, like that's the 4th I, is implementation. Implementation in the continent has been a big problem, because if you look at all the best policies in the world, they are found in this African continent, that people even jokingly say sometimes that Africa has become a cemetery for policies, which is true. Last year, the continent adopted the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. That was the dream of our founding fathers. If you take what is called the Yamoussoukro Declaration, which was adopted in 1999 to ensure that Africa can interconnect with one another,
right,
using the airspace and free air travel for each and everyone.
Intertrade.
Intertrade. All those beautiful policies are in the continent. The last part, and I, is the continent needs to be able to have institutions that work with each and everyone. And those institutions should actually be fit for purpose. And there are those institutions in the continent. So if you can be able to address incentives by helping people to find their passion, by recognizing that each and every one is important, that if you are doing something, because we will need the entirety of each and every one to be able to solve the problems. If you just take the agro-value chain that I mentioned, it is not agriculturalists that will solve the problem. You need ICT experts, especially the youthful population, to be able to connect a farmer from farm to market so that what he or she is producing can be able to fetch a market even beyond Kenya and even beyond the continent. You will need an expert in energy that can be able to help develop a solar dryer that can be able to use to add value to dry the vegetables of the farmer who is producing. So when you put all these in its entirety, it means that it is not necessarily the level of education that matters. You don't need to have a PhD to be able to contribute, but you need to be inspired. You need to be guided in a structured way. And that is why the essence of innovative volunteerism comes in.
So, Dr. Richard, why are skills important? And perhaps can we bring it down to Akumon level? If I'm a carpenter, why are skills important? How will that help me, and how will that help the African continent in general?
Skills are very, very crucial. If you look at the world in which we are living today, and more so in the African continent, the challenges that I've already enumerated, as you will find in the book, whether it is food insecurity, whether it is poverty, whether it is youth unemployment, especially the youth that are leaving the continent buried under the Mediterranean Sea in search of greener pastures, so some being sold into slavery as they cross the Sahara Desert in search of greener pastures elsewhere.
And the slave trade in Libya.
Absolutely. In 2019, we should not even be talking about these things. We are in the 21st century.
It's true.
And sometimes, when you look at all these and you put them in perspective, the failure has been lack of recognizing that skills are quite very, very crucial because, and those skills need to be retailored to the realities of the present situations or conditions in which we live in today. Which then means if we are, because now as we're speaking, we're talking about robotics, we're talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking about big data. That means that even if you had had a skill before, without understanding how you can be able to use internet or to use your mobile phone, you have to start perfecting those skills because skills need to evolve to be relevant to the situations in which we have today. What I usually say, we must reconcile our academic certificates or our skills with the realities of today and tomorrow. And that is why, if you take a carpenter, for example, who must have been quite very useful, whether in helping to put a roof in someone's house or to be able to produce chairs, the evolvement of technology today, he will need then to understand how he can be able also to use an application, an ICT application, to be able to market even what he or she is producing, what he is producing, the chairs, or to also engage actors that might not have known about his work. That is the reality of the situation in which we are living today. That then means everyone needs to continuously perfect his or her skills. But those skills should be perfected, especially in areas where Africa have got abundance, in what we call catalytic sectors.
Wow.
And that is the agricultural sector, and also the abundant energy, as you said, 365 days of sunshine, and still we don't have access to electricity up to about 620 million citizens. Paradoxical,
is
isn't
Africa's bad leadership to blame?
Leadership is not just about political positions. Leadership is attitudes. Leadership is inspiration. Leadership is passion. And when you put these in perspective, it means that whatever thing each and every one of us does, whether we are sweeping floors elsewhere, or we're just vendors selling newspapers, or we're teachers in a classroom, or we're journalists like yourself, or climate scientists or experts like myself, we must be able to show that whatever thing we do it with passion, and we do it to be able to inspire others, because inspiration is actually what Africa lacks. And that is why Africa needs what is called internal rejuvenation. If you take, for example, traffic lights, how many people will stop when the lights turn red? You would see so many people. That's part of leadership, to lead by example. And unless we start to be organized, because being organized is quite very, very important. And that takes me to an aspect which is quite very, very instrumental. what is called African time. There is nothing on this earth called African time. And that is part of the failure that the continent have also faced. Because the world, we have 24 hours a day. And those 24 hours a day, as you will see in the book, where I have captured that opportunities happen to each and everyone. The circumstances of your birth doesn't actually determine your destiny or your future. It is you as an individual, regardless of where you are born, to be able to recognize that the ingenuity in you, it is only you who can actually unleash that passion in you to be able to achieve everything. But to do so, you must actually develop some characters and attributes that are essential. That's humility, that's diligence, that's hard work. And as you see in chapter 1, those are values that actually I was taught in the small village of Jinkwi where I was born. So in essence, readers are leaders. Mostly in the continent today, sometimes we don't read but we want to argue from a position that is not really validated. So we need to read, and we need to shun this aspect of African time because it sucks up a lot of energy. Meetings that are supposed to start at 9, we start at 12 o'clock. And losing time is actually losing wealth. And to be competitive in the global space today, we must actually recognize that time is of essence. And with time, knowing that there is no African time, we can do a lot.
You know, Dr. Richard, I ask you about leadership because a lot of young people in this continent feel betrayed, feel wasted. You look at our leadership here in Kenya, your way to wealth is being a politician. And not just in Kenya, on the African continent. You look at Zimbabwe, you look at Cameroon, and the attempted coup d'etat that happened last week, trying to push a family that has reigned in a country for 50 years. So my generation is looking up and seeing this generation that used shortcuts. This generation that got into power and they suck Africa's prosperity in every way, be it by use of minerals, be it by use of people and time, like you have said. So young people are feeling, why should I continue to be a proud African? Why should I continue to stay on this continent? And because it feels like you are enslaved by it. Why should I continue to stay on this continent where it's working against me? Having a business is becoming more difficult. Why don't I not just go to a Western country and settle there? So why should we continue to believe in Africa? Why should my generation continue to wake up every morning and say, we will be different, when you can see what's happening around us? Why, Dr. Richard?
Actually, Africa is the last best hope of humankind. It is a continent that has got everything. It just needs the fundamentals to be gotten right. Why do I say so? If you want your life to count and matter, Africa is a place to be. If you want your skills and talents to matter, Africa is a place to be. Challenges in every adversity. There's an African proverb that goes that in every adversity, there are seeds of equal or higher benefit. That means there is reward in addressing challenges. And those challenges are found in the continent, and the solutions are also found in this continent. So there is no need to despair about a continent. And what Africa needs today, as I said, it needs internal rejuvenation. And that boils down only to 2 words: motivation and inspiration. And it's me and you to be able to do that. Because the reality is that if you are talking about the frontier for transformational change across the entire world, it is in the continent today. Africa can feed the world.
It can.
But potential doesn't put food on the table. So the discussion should really be about why is it that Africa's potential, 60 years after independence, we still talk about potential today? And the answer lies down in one thing. It lies down in 3 aspects. We focus on individualism rather than collectivism.
All right. So, Dr. Richard, allow me to get a bit personal. On chapter 3 of the book, it's called From Cameroon to England. Choices have consequences and dedication pays. Tell me a little bit about your own personal journey.
Thank you very much. Again, I was born in the northwestern part of Cameroon in 1978. I was born to a family of 5. And I grew up, it was actually an impoverished family. My mom and dad were subsistence farmers. And they struggled to send us to school by actually harvesting what they planted. And sometimes there was crop failure, so there were some years we could not even attend school. But we were taught that poverty is not something that you should think is permanent. Poverty is not permanent. To be poor is a mindset. I went to school without shoes, but the motivation from my parents was that with passion, humility, and dedication, you can become anything in this world. Later on, when I finished primary school, they sent me to secondary school, but when I finished high school, I could not have the money to go to university. It was my uncle who finally paid my fees, but at the university, I had to stay with my uncle's friend, trekking kilometers away from the university for 3 years. But the dedication was that, as they told me, passion, humility, and hard work are the ingredients that can actually lift you to become anything in the world. But when I finished university, I had to volunteer for 1 year. And volunteering for 1 year without pay, most of my classmates said, how can you volunteer without pay? But it was that volunteering for 1 year that gave me the best lessons of my life till today. And then it was also that volunteering experience that helped me to win a scholarship to study at the University of Nottingham in England, where I later on got my doctorate degree. But the lesson is very simple. You should never ever miss an opportunity to enhance your skill and to build your experience, because that is worth more than money. Because the scholarship I got was in thousands of pounds. My parents could never have afforded to pay, even to send me to study in a foreign university. Mm-hmm. But volunteering gave me those best lessons. And they did not only help reshape me and build that experience, but they prepared me to face the future. But in England, when I went to England, what I decided to do was, because when I was growing up, I could notice crop failure in my mother's farm. And I used to question, why is it so? And at that time, climate change was called global warming. Mm. And I decided to pursue a doctorate degree to understand what exactly the African continent could be able to do to ensure that we can address climate change, seeing it as a business opportunity, a solution to socio-economic challenges. And that is and that was how I found my purpose, because the failure of my mother's crop actually motivated me not only to work hard, but to ensure that no mountain was too high to climb.
So what is Africa's role when it comes to tackling global warming?
Actually, Africa is a leader when it comes to tackling global warming. In 2015, December, you must have heard what was called the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Yes. Where the entire global community came together and adopted that global agreement, which was to ensure that we can be able to lower greenhouse emissions to curb the temperatures that are actually increasing as a result of these gases. But what has happened is that after that adoption, Africa have ratified this Paris Climate Change Agreement. As we're speaking today, more than 47 countries have done so. That means they have seen the opportunities that are inherent in taking actions. But what needs to be done at the moment is that the focus should be on how can you be able to address climate change, at the same time creating opportunities for the youth so that jobs could be created for them, but also actually engaging them to be the biggest constituents and the drivers of climate action. And that is the essence of why innovative volunteerism become quite very, very crucial.
All right, because we need to close off our conversation. My last question would be, Dr. Richard, what's your dream? What's your hope for the African continent?
Well, the African continent is the frontier not only of global development, but of also transformational change. But the engagement of youth, the youth are the drivers. They are the tip of the spear. They represent the change makers, not just for the continent, but for the entire world. But we must never ever forget that if we ignore them, we will never ensure that Africa truly rise. But engaging the entire global value chain, and bringing in youth, especially, for example, like here in Kenya, where youth have come together through the spirit of innovative volunteerism, and they're driving an initiative called Ebagro Pamoja, where they're connecting their marketing skills, their information communication skills, and clean energy to actually decentralize clean energy to be able to help farmers add value to what they're producing, dry their vegetables, and connect them to market. Each and every one of us should know that the energetic and the vibrancy ability of youth provides the solutions that Africa needs today, and embracing them and shunning selfishness, embracing collectivism, instilling hopefulness in people is the ingredient that Africa needs to move forward.
Dr. Richard, thank you for your time, and thank you for writing this book. If our audience wanted to get it, where can they get it? Where is it available?
Actually, if you go online, you can be able to get it. If you go to Amazon, you can be able to get it.
All right. So that's Dr. Richard, Making Africa Work Through the Power of Innovative Volunteerism. Make it one of the books that you have to read in 2019. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll give you an update of stories making headlines on the international front. We'll be right back.